business adjustment and 0.75% per annum. An interest charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is equal to the greater of the sum of 1.25% per annum plus the business adjustment and 0% per annum. And D, the principal amount of the credit is repayable on each 15th day of February and 15th day of August, commencing on the 15th day of August 2029 to and including the 15th day of February 2039 at the rate of 1%, and commencing on the 15th day of August 2039 to and including the 15th day of February 2059 at the rate of 2%. Be it resolved that Parliament, by affirmative resolution, approves the draft value added tax amendment of Schedules 1 and 3, number 2 order, which remains Schedules 1 and 3 of the Act. In the case of Schedule 1, under Item 1, to include a definition of the words funeral package and funeral home. Under Item 2.1, to include as a zero-rated good a supply of goods that form part of a funeral package provided by a funeral home. Under Item 2, to include as a zero-rated service a supply of a service that forms part of a funeral package provided by a funeral home. A service directly related to the reconnection of water provided by the Water and Sewage Authority or Water and Sewage Company Incorporated, WASCO. A service directly related to the reconnection of electrical energy provided by the St. Lucia Electricity Services Company Limited, LUCELEC. A service under the contract agreement between the St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority and the Overseas Engineering and Construction Company, LTDA, SAOECC, for the Hewanora International Airport Redevelopment Project. A supply of service under the contract agreement between the government of St. Lucia and the Overseas Engineering and Construction Company, LTDA, OECC, for the Road Improvement and Maintenance Program, Phase 4. The case of Schedule 3 to exempt imported goods and services for the Road Improvement and Maintenance Program, Phase 4, for the period commencing from the 31st May of 2019 and terminating on the 12th day of November 2021. The President of the Senate is about to enter the House, led by the Sergeant of Arms, and this is about to happen just at this moment. And so we get ready for the House session, Senate session for today, for this afternoon.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move the first reading of a bill shortly entitled Fiscal Incentives Amendment.
Fiscal Incentives Amendment.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order number 49-2 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Senators, the question is that Standing Order number 49-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honourable Minister to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as are of the contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Proceed, Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move the second reading of a bill shortly entitled Fiscal Incentives Amendment. The bill for consideration is the Fiscal Incentives Amendment Bill. The purpose of the Fiscal Incentives Amendment Bill is to amend the Fiscal Incentives Act, Cap 1516, the Act. On review of the Act, it became apparent, Madam President, that a number of new provisions should be added to the Act to make it more lucrative to the business environment. Therefore, changes were required to allow for the waiver of customs duties and excise tax on certain services and to allow for the exemption of income tax for a period not exceeding 5 years to manufacturing enterprises that have exhausted the 15 years tax holiday period specified under Section 12(1) of the Act, and inclusion of a new schedule attached to the Act to list the criteria for additional income tax exemption. In order to facilitate the changes to be made, Madam President, the words used in the Act need to be adjusted. As a result, the Act is amended in the bill to insert a new definition for industry and to add a definition for the words approved service and service. Currently under the Act, Cabinet can declare a product for manufacture as an approved product. The Act is therefore amended to provide Cabinet with an additional power to declare a service for delivery by an approved enterprise to be an approved service. Additionally, Cabinet has the power to declare an enterprise to be an approved enterprise if the enterprise is for the purpose of establishing an industry in St. Lucia to manufacture an approved product. An enterprise that delivers an approved service is now able to make an application to be declared an approved enterprise under the Act. An exemption from customs duty and excise tax is included in the Act through the insertion of a new provision to deal with the same. Cabinet is therefore empowered to exempt an approved enterprise that delivers an approved service from customs duty and excise tax under the Act. To make it easier to amend the schedules to the Act, a new provision is added to the Act so that Cabinet can, by an order published in the Gazette, change the schedules to the Act. The services that benefit from the exemptions under the Act are listed in the new Schedule 1A. The schedule includes services such as professional services, creative industries, and information and communications technology services. Another schedule, that Schedule 5, is added to the Act to provide the criteria that must be satisfied by an approved enterprise for the grant of an additional exemption from income tax period as stated above. So, Madam President, we are submitting this bill for the approval of this House. Thank you.
Honourable Leader of Government Business. Senators, the question is that the Fiscal Incentives Amendment Bill be read a second time. Honourable Leader of Opposition Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Very soon. Yes, Madam President, on this incentives amendment. And I notice again the leader of government business didn't volunteer much in terms of information in her presentation, and I suspect she would await in the rebuttal to provide the additional information that may be needed. I noticed, Madam President, the leader of government business has consistently made a presentation in that manner. But, Madam President, the support in terms of fiscal incentives for businesses as outlined in the creative professional services, creative industries, information and communication technology, spa and wellness services, are critical areas of intervention for business people that could do with incentives, and that is welcome. This is very good. However, Madam President, a business environment, for business environment to facilitate growth and for persons to participate, it must be underpinned by certain, what I consider certain pillars. And I know a few of them, like sociocultural, competitive, technological, economic, political and regulatory, and natural. These areas, Madam President, is important for business to survive. We are looking at one area, and I think this may be the political and regulatory, but competitive. For business to survive and for persons to be able to invest in a market like ours, there must be competition, or it must be competitive. And I say this, Madam President, because of the environment of direct purchases that this government has embarked upon. When persons are not allowed to compete, to offer a price, and their price is actually weighed against another, when the government, because, Madam President, one of the areas of professional services, including here, I think, is integrated engineering services and engineering service. These areas, Madam President, the government is a major employer of such services. A major employer. There are not many opportunities apart from being employed by the government, either directly or indirectly, to provide such service. But if the government has remained with one set of professionals from the time it has taken office, and there are incentives here, what would prompt an engineering firm that is associated maybe with the St. Lucia Labour Party to decide to take advantage of the incentives to invest? And this is the essence, this is the ethos of such an amendment. It is to provide an environment where other persons and these areas can invest. So I'm stating, Madam President, it's all good and well to provide incentives. Say bon bagay. But we must ensure that our business environment is underpinned by those pillars I've mentioned. It must be underpinned by a principle, market principle we call competition. You offer a price, and that price is evaluated. On the basis of your price being evaluated, you are given an opportunity to serve. Direct purchase cannot become the norm. It must be the exception to the rule. And if, as somebody who is in that industry, if I observe that the government have taken on a relationship with one service provider, and I understand that when you look at the contribution of the construction industry to GDP, and you look at how government participates, government is a significant player in the construction industry in small island states, and account for almost, from what I noticed from the ECCB, pretty close to about 9 to 12%. Significant activity, maybe it's a little low now, but it is significant activities that's going on, significant activities going on in the construction sector that is being led by the government as a major facilitator, as a major employer. And therefore, good incentives are there. The idea of having competition and having fair market operations is essential so that persons could make use of such incentives. I dare anybody at this point in time who is involved in construction not associated, you understand, not associated with, you understand, the UWP government or this administration to invest in a backhoe or an excavator at this point in time. You understand? And I'm saying, Madam President, these were some of the discussion held at one of the previous parliamentarians that we were part of, in terms of how do we facilitate and promote those environments to allow for small businesses to participate in a market economy. And I'm not in any way saying that there are some areas that government is not involved who would benefit sufficiently, like the spa. I see the spa and the 8 persons involved in those areas. It is not one of concern for me, but I'm particularly concerned about the areas where government is a major employer. So, fellow senators, very good initiative, but that should be taken into consideration to allow for fair competition and equal opportunity for those who have invested and would like to participate in the industry. Thank you very much.
Senator Uji.
Madam President, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Trust everyone had a wonderful lunch. Madam President, this is a good initiative and I would like to support it overtly. I do have some questions for clarification. Madam President, I noticed the use of the word group enterprise in at least 2 sections of the amendment. I'm not familiar with the terminology, and to my recollection, it does not appear in the original act. I could be corrected if I am wrong, but nor do I find a definition for group enterprise anywhere in the existing document. Again, I may have missed it, but I've been through several times and have not found it. So I would like to ask what we mean by group enterprise. And secondly, Madam President, I would like to applaud the inclusion, the explicit inclusion of creative industries in Schedule 1A, Part B, and I note subsection 2 of that Part B, entertainment services, which is wonderful, but it conflicts, at least philosophically, with the recent requirements for entertainment tax, which have been levied rather strenuously, I would submit, across a wide range of entertainment activities, which used not to be the case. But the entertainment tax, which has been in abeyance, I think, effectively for some time, if not off the books, has been effectively reintroduced. And there's a little bit of a give and take here, that on the one hand, we're including the entertainment services, which is wonderful, but then we seem to be pursuing some rather punitive practices with regard to the entertainment tax. So mixed signals to the sector, I would say. Well, thank you very much, Madam President. That is all.
Honorable Minister in the Ministry of Tourism, Information, Broadcasting, Culture and Creative Industries, responsible for culture and creative industries.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I rise to lend my support to this motion. You know, we live in an era when we have various colors, you know, assigned to different parts of the economy. And so there is the blue economy, which encourages better stewardship of our ocean resources. There is the green economy, which focuses on climate change and ecological economics. There's the gray economy, which is the informal economy, the part of the economy that is not regulated. And of course, there is the silver economy, that deals with the goods and services focused on the elderly. And we know there's the black economy, which is the illegal economy. But what we have before us today in the fiscal and incentives, the Fiscal Incentives Amendment Bill is a bill that seeks to really, in a nutshell, capture the essence, of the work that we are doing with respect to the orange economy. And so the orange economy, Madam Chair or Madam President, when I say the orange economy, I'm speaking about all sectors where goods and services are based on intellectual property, and most of them, are listed within the schedule that we have here. Architecture, entertainment, visual and performing arts, craft, film, design, and the whole gambit. And the orange economy is a very critical economy in that globally it represents about 6% of the world's GDP. However, in St. Lucia, we have not been able to quantify the contribution of the creative sector or the creative economy up until now. And that is because we have not taken it seriously. What we do know is that given the wealth of talent and creativity that abounds on our island, there is much potential to be tapped in this sector. When we look at countries like Jamaica and the USA, the orange economy contributes significantly, to their respective GDPs. Madam President, the orange economy is about people. It's about us. It's about our heritage, our capabilities, our capacities, our creativity, and our future. And the amendment to the legislation by my government is for the inclusion in the development and expansion of this economy of St. Lucia by all persons who are ambitious, competitive, and wish to ignite their passion, to make their contribution using their creative skills. So it places our people first and foremost and provides the opportunity for them to develop themselves and their businesses through much needed concessions to build, on that business. And so it also helps us to address some of the deficiencies that have been highlighted in the past. In the past, we've heard our small people in the society are not getting the opportunities, we're not getting the incentives for the businesses. And I was happy to hear my colleague senator, the independent senator, commend us on this initiative. Madam President, we've been independent for 40 years now. 40 years we've been independent. And I think finally, after 40 years of independence, we have come to realize the value of who we are and how we can bring that value as a people, to the table for our people. We have also come to realize that the tourism industry that we have so heavily been dependent on over the years requires Lucianness at the core or at the fore, because visitors are looking for an authentic St. Lucian experience when they do come here. And through the Fiscal Incentives Act, it gives us the opportunity, it gives our people the opportunity to go out there, be creative, and of course, present ourselves to our country. So my government, this government of the people, for the people, by the people, who listens to the people, continues to work with the people to empower them, to give them the confidence they need to persevere and achieve as much as they can. As a government, we continue to demonstrate that. And, I must inform the House that just recently we approved the Goodwill Ambassadors and Brand Ambassadors program for St. Lucia, where those persons, in the case of the Goodwill Ambassadors, who have been able to achieve global acclaim or international acclaim, would be leveraging their celebrity status, in the interest of our country. And our brand ambassadors, young, upcoming talent from St. Lucia, will be given that opportunity to be out there leveraging for St. Lucia. And so with this in mind, we've been able to give them the support required through the Fiscal Amendments Incentives Act to take care of their own business as they strive to assist us as a country in realizing our own goals. Orange economy, and I guess you're asking about yellow economy, but the yellow economy and the red economy, when you combine them, you get the orange economy. And if you look at red and orange, they combine and make orange. And so, as an administration, we are about healing our country and putting things in perspective for our people. So we'll be supporting everybody, you understand, through this initiative. Once you are ambitious, you have the plan, you have the commitment, we are there to support you. Good shot? Okay, all right. Now, the other important point I want to make. So apart from the inclusive nature of who we are as a government and where we're headed, what has been done, what we have done with respect to this, because we didn't just get to this point. There was lots of consultation and dialogue with organizations. But earlier this year, our government also secured a credit facility to facilitate entrepreneurs in the creative sector, you understand, to allow them easy access to funding for their products, for their programs. Now we are amending the Fiscal Incentives Act to give them greater opportunity. And of course, we are also working assiduously on developing the satellite accounting system to enable us to quantify and make even better decisions around the creative economy. In the coming weeks, the Cultural and Creative Industries Registry and Mapping will be functional because it was down for a while with the Cultural Development Foundation, but it will be functional to build a base for the satellite account. This registry is of paramount importance and will be used as a tool to audit all actors within the orange economy. We are also revisiting our cultural policy to ensure that it continues to be relevant to the needs of the sector and to inform planning and programming. And importantly for the sector, we are reviewing the legislative arrangements around our Intellectual Property Act to ensure that all areas are adequately covered as we look to maximize the benefits from the orange economy. So the Fiscal Incentives Act is not just a simple act, but it's an act that speaks to a new direction for us with respect to our people, their creativity, their skills and abilities. And we welcome this initiative by the government. Thank you, Madam President. Orange.
Senator Mangal.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Just quickly, a few responses to leader of the opposition business concerns. Madam President, it is sad again that this...
Senator, have you made a submission before on this bill?
No.
Responses come from the leader of government business in form of rebuttal.
Okay.
Are you making a
Madam.
submission?
I'm doing a presentation, Madam.
Thank you.
Very much, Madam President. Madam President, we heard about direct awards, and we heard that persons, or rather an engineering service or an engineering firm, may not have the confidence because the government is the major employer and the government seems to be favoring one contractor and so on. Madam President, I really believe that if such incentives are followed, if such incentives are given, where is the confidence that you have? Well, certainly I don't see quantity survey in here. So,
Madam President, point of order. Madam President.
Senator Henry.
Yeah, Madam President, the member is rebutting and directly and is not making a contribution.
Senator, your mic. Senator Mangal, phrase your submission so that it sounds more like a submission than a rebuttal, which is not in your purview.
Very well, Madam President. Madam President, I stand to support this incentive bill in its entirety. Madam President, it is very good that this government again have recognized that not only the manufacturing sector should be provided with incentives, but rather the service industry as well should be provided with incentives, professionals within the service industry. And having provided professionals within the service industry those incentives, naturally, I do encourage them to take advantage of those incentives. They should have the confidence, irrespective of who's the employer, whether it be the government of St. Lucia favoring one party or another, or whether it be private sector interests, Madam President. I believe that engineering services and integrated engineering services should take advantage of those services and should actually take advantage, of those incentives, and should actually take the opportunity to be able to move one step forward in providing services, Madam President. And in this regard, we've heard so much about direct awards, Madam President, but I just want to refer that whereas we may have such objections to direct award, from the Ministry of Finance, the average that the opposition party, when they were in government, took as direct awards yearly was $71.3 million.
Senator
Whereas,
Mangal.
yes, Madam President.
Your submission is to be on the Fiscal Incentives Amendment Act. Can we keep it within that?
Madam President, I saw the leader of government business going out very widely and talking about direct awards and not creating the platform and so on. So I thought I would be allowed the same leverage in just going to the same extent in which he has gone and not further, Madam President.
Except when you're saying it in answer to him, which is what you keep saying.
Well, Madam President, I was not really answering. I was just giving the facts as to what is the level of direct awards that the previous government did, and as compared to what is the level of direct award that this government has done in the time. And if you were to follow the Ministry of Finance, you'd realize that per annum there was actually a greater value of direct awards granted under the former government than in this particular government. And I could say clearly that whereas the majority of the direct awards being given by this government is being given to local institutions, that may not necessarily be the case on the other side, Madam President. So I would just end by saying that I support this document. I support those incentives fully, that those incentives are certainly geared both at the manufacturing and at the service sector, a sector which we know that is growing. The creative industry sector, we need to be able to export our talent into the other countries, Madam President. And certainly by our local artists being given that opportunity to be able to equip themselves with the necessary tools, we certainly would be able to, on the global scale, be able to contribute. Because this is what we have, Madam President. It's our human resource and our natural talent at this country. We may be small, but our human resource can compete with anybody in the world. And I make reference to places like Guyana in Barbados and so forth. We certainly, by investing in our young people, investing into the creative industries, we would certainly take our people to the next level. And I must say, I fully support this piece of legislation. Thank you.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Senator Oje asked, what is group enterprise? Group enterprise, it is an association of businesses grouped together, bound together by legal or financial links, and sometimes controlled by a group leader. So a group of businesses. It's not defined in the Act. Well, I suppose it's assuming that that definition is known, because it is not unique to this bill. It's like you say, a conglomerate. That is known, so if a bill mentions a conglomerate, it may not necessarily be defined in the definitions of the words. But I think we can note that, Senator, and take it up. All right? Madam President, Senator Henry also spoke of competition. And I want to point out that this is an amendment of the Fiscal Incentives Act, and he ought to remember that the Fiscal Incentive Act is the act that really is the legislation, the overall legislation. This is just an amendment, Madam President, to augment what is already in the Fiscal Incentives Act. And I am aware that we do not have competition law and policy in St. Lucia, but I know that the Ministry of Commerce is in the process of looking at that sort of legislation to address competition law and policy. So, Madam President, I submit the Fiscal Incentives Amendment Act to the Senate for approval. Thank you.
Senators, the question is that this Fiscal Incentives Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye.
Aye.
As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Fiscal Incentives Act, tab 15.16.
We'll take it by clauses. Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 3.
Amendment of Section 2.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Clause 4.
Substitution of Section 5.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill. Clause 5.
Substitution of Section 6.
Clause 5 stands part of the bill. Clause 6.
Amendment of Section 12.
Clause 6 stands part of the bill. Clause 7.
Insertion of new Section 12A.
Clause 7 stands part of the bill. Clause 8.
Insertion of new Section 24A.
Clause 8 stands part of the bill. Clause 9.
Insertion of new Schedule 1A.
Clause 9 stands part of the bill. Clause 10.
Insertion of new Schedule 5.
Clause 10 stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Senators, the question is that the committee rise and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Senators, I beg to report that the Fiscal Incentives Amendment Bill went through committee stage without amendment. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Senators, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the Fiscal Incentives Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This Act may be cited as the Fiscal Incentives Amendment Act 2019.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move the first reading of a bill shortly entitled Land and House Tax Amendment.
Land and House Tax Amendment.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order number 49-2 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Senators, the question is that Standing Order number 49-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honorable Minister to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Proceed, Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move the second reading of a bill shortly entitled Land and House Tax Amendment. The bill, Madam President, for consideration is the Land and House Tax Amendment Bill. The purpose of the bill is to amend the Land and House Tax Act. It provides for the short title. Clause 2 of the bill provides for the amendment of Section 7 of the Act to include an exemption from taxes on land and houses for the year 2020 with respect to residential property. Madam President, this is just extending on the duration of the time that we had given this exemption for initially. It is extending it to 3 years to include the 2020 as opposed to stopping in 2019. This again, Madam President, is another campaign promise that we made where we grant residential property tax exemption for the 3rd year and for it to be reassessed after this 3rd year. Another promise kept, Madam President, and so I submit the amendment for approval. It's a very short amendment, and it basically is just stating that we're asking for the additional year, exemption for the additional year. That is going to bring a lot of comfort again to all the people of St. Lucia who are now paying, who are required to pay property taxes, some of us included in this. And I know that a lot of my comrades, a lot of my workers, a lot of the people that I know who own houses and are paying property tax are very relieved and cannot wait for the extension of this extra year where they are going to get this additional relief, Madam President. So I submit this to this Honorable House, again, to bring some soulagement to the people of St. Lucia. Thank you.
Senators, the question is that the Land and House Tax Amendment Bill be read a second time. Senator Ogier.
Madam, just a question. Are we allowed to make a comment at this point on the matter? Genuine question.
You have not made a submission on this bill, have
So
you?
it is allowed. No, I have not, Madam President. Madam
Is that
President,
what you wish to do, make a submission on
yes,
the
Madam
bill?
President, if I may.
Proceed.
Thank you very much. Madam President, I was just wondering whether government, in consideration of this rather large generosity, is familiar with or has considered the concept of granting such exemptions to people with what is called homestead legislation. Your homestead is where you live. It's your primary residence. It's intended to identify persons who really need a break on their actual dwelling place as opposed to people who may be granted an incentive and who have multiple properties and who are therefore in a different business altogether. And I was just wondering whether in the exemption of properties generally we should not make a distinction between those people who are occupying their dwelling as opposed to people who have investment property. As wonderful as it is for people who have investment property to be exempted from property tax, it's not quite the same scenario if we are trying to identify, say, first-time home owners, young professionals investing in a home, your primary mortgage, your primary residence. I think there should be a slight distinction between the generosity we exhibit to first-time owners and young people and people with one mortgage as opposed to people with investment property. Thank you, Madam President, for your indulgence.
Senators, the question is that the Land and House Tax Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Land and House Tax Act, Cap 15.13.
We take it by clauses. Clause 2.
Amendment of Section 7.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Senators, the question is that the committee rise and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Senators, I beg to report that the Land and House Tax Amendment Bill went through committee stage without amendment. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Senators, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the Land and House Tax Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This Act may be cited as the Land and House Tax Amendment Act 2019.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move the first reading of a bill shortly entitled Economic Substance.
Economic Substance.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order number 49-2 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Senators, the question is that Standing Order number 49-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honorable Minister to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Proceed, Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, this bill seems a little bulky. However, it is very, very simple in its substance. The bill is the Economic Substance Bill. It requires an entity to carry out an economic activity in a relevant sector to satisfy economic substance requirements as a condition for a tax exemption on income accrued from a source outside of St. Lucia under the Income Tax Act and for related matters. The bill does not apply to an international business company, international partnership, or international trust incorporated or registered prior to the 31st day of December 2018. It provides for the administration of the bill. It tells us who the competent authority is and that the competent authority is responsible for monitoring the compliance of a relevant entity with economic substance, which are the requirements under this bill. The competent authority may delegate its functions under Clause 6 of the bill. Madam President, the government of St. Lucia made a number of legislative amendments in an effort to satisfy the organizational requirement for economic cooperation and development and European Union Code of Conduct, tax compliant criteria as it pertains to fair taxation and attracting profits which do not reflect real economic activity. These two bodies had both identified various aspects of St. Lucia's legislation which they have deemed harmful, resulting in the OECD and COCG EU blacklisting St. Lucia, which is later downgraded to being grey-listed by the COCG EU. As a result, Madam President, the workers of the Ministry of Finance had to conduct a lot of investigations and comply with quite a few rules and regulations in order for us to go from the blacklist to the grey list. In 2018, Section 32 of the Income Tax Act was amended by deleting and introducing a new section which stipulates that Section 1 shall not be construed so as to bring within the meaning of accessible income liable to assessment under Part 10 in the case of a company, income that is deemed to have accrued from a source outside St. Lucia in accordance with Section 10A. By so doing, the COCG argues that St. Lucia has ring-fenced or is providing special treatment to transactions with non-residents. For St. Lucia to be removed, Madam President, and my Prime Minister best articulated that, the challenges we've had with, which caused us to come up with this bill, is so that St. Lucia, so that we can be removed from the EU's grey list, and for us to put St. Lucia in a better place, so to speak, Madam President. In dialogue with the Secretary of COCG-EU, the Economic Substance Bill was conceived as the most likely solution. The bill seeks to ensure that every business entity referred to in the legislation as a relevant entity must engage in economic activity in one or more of the relevant sector activities identified in the proposed legislation within the jurisdiction. And that is really the core and the substance of this bill, that you have to show that you have business activities ongoing in this country so that you can qualify. That way, we are removing the gray areas where the EU, the COCG-EU, is having difficulty understanding the relationship between the companies that we are giving these exemptions and companies that they regard as using St. Lucia as a tax haven. So we are showing that and proving that by these companies having businesses in St. Lucia, that they are actually conducting business in the country, as opposed to just using us as tax havens or that sort of thing. So, Madam President, this is really what this bill is trying to accomplish. It is really trying to show transparency in terms of the companies that are registered and listed as doing business in St. Lucia, that they are actually conducting ongoing business in the country. Without much discussion, Madam President, I think this is very, very clear to me, and I will welcome any questions that my fellow senators may have. But at this stage, Madam President, and I know there's been a lot of discussion on this bill, I am submitting this to this Honorable Senate because it is in the interest of our entire country and all the people, especially since we rely on tourism, and we do not want our country to be in any kind of blacklist or gray list. We have to ensure that we have the necessary legislation to clarify our position and make it clear that we are not sheltering or harboring anyone that the EU may think is conducting some clandestine activity in our country. And I submit this, Madam President, for this Senate's approval.
Senators, the question is that the Economic Substance Bill be read a second time. Honorable Leader of Opposition Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Of course, I am guided by the contribution from the Leader of Government Business, as she has articulated the importance of this piece of legislation. And of course, the areas she has highlighted, Madam President, I think is significant and serious enough to warrant that a piece of legislation must be placed in force, especially as it relates to the image of our country and persons who would like to do business or who come to this jurisdiction to participate in one business venture or the other. Madam President, sometimes, in time past, you would recognize, especially in certain parts of the island, there would be persons operating, providing service, and one may not even recognize them as a regular provider of service, whether they are architects or what have you, operating from somebody's home or what have you, and they're involved in significant projects. And I take it that this piece of legislation would probably attempt to have persons register so that we do not create a haven where they are participating and not being recognized, avoiding tax payment. So for the importance of such, I do support this piece of legislation for coming from the opposition. and of course hope that it will do us well. Some questions, just one question that I would ask, and I don't know how appropriate it is in terms of the act, is in terms of the quality, the nature of business. Is there a set of certain activities within the country that is specified that the person must be participating in to qualify, and not that you are doing anything whatsoever? Is there in St. Lucia, this is a particular jurisdiction, is it stating that you should be, yes, you should be participating in certain sectors, of course, banking business, insurance, shipping, international mutual business, headquarters. There are some activities also that I'm not seeing there, and I think that one may wish to consider the inclusion of other businesses that are not here, but persons leaving there from the U.S., come between the pitons, build some of the most, design and build some of the most expensive buildings you could imagine, and it's not featured. You may have persons operating home offices, however they're designing massive and very expensive buildings. So it's limited to just a few areas, but I think that there may be other areas of service that can be included in this listing. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Senator Auger.
Yes, Madam President, thank you. I think that's the last time I'm rising today, Madam President. If I've made a nuisance of myself, you will excuse me. A few quick comments, Madam President. One recognizes the importance of this legislation in terms of international compliance, and it is good that we are moving swiftly to bring it about. I trust, Madam President, that this has been vetted for compliance with our corporate headquarters legislation, which would be an important adjunct to any consideration under here. I have some quick comments I would like to point out, Madam, primarily with regard to language. The bill points out, for example, Madam President, that the relevant authority is the minister, but in at least 3 other sections, it says that the relevant authority may consult with the minister may consult with the relevant authority, which suggests that the minister is consulting with himself. And particularly in section 23, 24, and 25, the minister and the competent authority seem to be interchangeable, which gives the minister authority to change, amend, add, revise without a recourse to any other entity. And I think that that is dangerous, not necessarily under our current Minister of Finance, but who knows what nefarious characters may occupy that seat in due course. So, Madam, I think that we ought to be looking for something a little bit more logical than to have the minister named as the competent authority and then to require the minister to confer with the competent authority, which is in fact himself. I would like to also mention that in section 10, Madam President, which would be on page 2, it says the registrar may strike off the name of a relevant entity from the register for failing to comply with the economic substance requirements for 2 consecutive years of income. That is quite draconian, and since the legislation does not provide for certification anywhere that I can find, Madam President, there is no certificate of compliance that could be issued to somebody who is compliant. So nowhere does it make arrangements for the applicant to be given some form of documentation which says I am in compliance and therefore I am not subject to being struck off or any other penalties.
You're referring to section 10?
Section 10, page 2, Madam President. Middle of the paragraph, the registrar may strike off the name of a relevant entity.
Under explanatory note and not under the act itself then?
Well, I went
You're on
through
explanatory note?
I went through explanatory note, yes, Madam President. but I couldn't find anything for certification anywhere. And it's a bit glaring because whereas in section 7, page 1 into page 2, it allows for the competent authority, which is the minister, to notify the Controller of Inland Revenue of the compliance of the company, but does not make provision to inform the company itself. So I think that that's maybe a bit of a omission. Similarly, Madam President, if I can just find the section in page 15, section 6, where the public officer enters the premises under a warrant, which again is it's good that we have that authority, but it says that if he or she finds any article, document, information which he or she has reasonable cause to believe may be relevant to the notice, that's the notice of non-compliance, he shall immediately deliver it to the competent authority, which again is the minister. And whereas the Act makes provision for the court to act in certain cases, I think that the delivery of evidence to someone who is in fact an elected officer, as opposed to an officer of the court, may not be the best and most transparent methodology, especially since the minister has wide powers under the Act to amend, forgive, revise, etc. So it seems to me, if we are creating a regulatory environment, that we should be clear about that, because the Act also makes provision for the minister to devolve his authority to some other entity. So there might be a regulatory entity that could be set up at some time. But then it is to that entity that evidence of non-compliance should be delivered, I would say, and not to a minister of government, any minister of government for that matter. In part 2, section 11, subsection 3, under the small e, Madam President, my apologies. That section D and E refers to the place of business, for example, and I'm wondering why we don't just say a registered address or place of business as opposed to must have adequate physical presence in the country. That seems rather vague and inappropriate. I think like all other businesses, you should be required to have a registered address and a place of business, so it's not subject to interpretation. There's some also soft language with regard to an adequate number of qualified employees. Adequate being, again, judgmental, but we can live with that, Madam President. And I'm questioning also why in section 3 on page 21 there is a requirement that the company submit evidence of the amount and type of income earned in respect of each relevant sector, the amount and type of expenses incurred and assets held in respect of each relevant sector. I mean, could we not just ask for audited financial statements, which is compliant with international financial accounting standards and international legislation, which this would be consistent with? So those would be my suggestions, Madam President. Thank you very much. I'll try not to rise again.
Senator Ferdinand.
Thank you, Madam President. I too rise for what I think is the last time. Just to make an observation based on the presentations that were made. I've noticed that colors have been referred to quite a lot today. Colors may sound like a very good thing. A lot of it in blue, red, and green, and so on, economy. And then in the submission by the leader of government business, reference is made to us getting off the blacklist and off the grey list. I think it's a good thing when any government comes to the Parliament to enact legislation that ensures that we comply to international tax expectations and so on. But my question is, we always believe that when we come to this house, it is necessary that we do so. Why did we have to find ourselves in that position in the first place? Why did we have to find ourselves on any list? Because we weren't on any list. And so I think that it's a good lesson for us as a parliament, as a government, to ensure that we stay away from statements that suggest that due diligence and all those onerous tax regulations, as the Prime Minister would have stated, can get in the way of investment. And now we find ourselves having to come to Parliament to pass legislation for us to be in compliance. So, Madam President, it's a very simple point I'm making, that sometimes we self-impose. We put ourselves in situations that we didn't have to be in. Had it not been for us being on the black list and on the gray list, maybe we would not have had to deal with that. However, I acknowledge the fact that it's important for us to ensure that legislation, like this piece of legislation, economic substance, is passed so that we can guard against us as a nation not being in compliance with international taxation and other requirements as far as doing business. So I hope that the lesson has been learned, and in future we will ensure that we seek to be in compliance with those expectations at all times. Thank you, Madam President.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. I have heard, I think, more than one senator indicate that this is the last time he's going to speak on. But then this really is the last opportunity, because this is the last bill for the day. So I do not think that we will need to be here for too much longer, Senator Ferdinand. But Madam President, I heard Senator Auger point out a few concerns he has as it relates to this bill. And I well suspect that some words may have been interchanged, right? But Madam President, I would like to request that Senator Auger bring up these concerns at the committee stage, so that if there is any need, then we can adopt the bill with its amendments. If there should be any amendments, although we are not legal persons here, so I think that the number of issues that he raised, I believe we ought to take it up at the committee stage, if that is okay for you, Madam President. That's just my suggestion, my humble suggestion. I would like to just make a little brief comment on Senator Gideon's presentation, where I quite agree with what the senator has said, and I commend him for actually sharing this with us in this honorable house, because I can recall on an occasion when a former Prime Minister promised that he was going to prevent investors from coming to this country. These kinds of reckless statements, Madam President. Recently, we had another fellow parliamentarian on a political platform in Dominica, Madam President, making some dangerous comments that we do not even want to repeat in this honorable house, Madam President. These are the kinds of statements that puts our country at risk and causes us to find ourselves on blacklist and gray list. That is very, very instructive, Senator Ferdinand, because these are not lists that we want to find ourselves on. But when we have parliamentarians, this is the highest level, this is the highest house in the land, And when we have parliamentarians making those careless remarks out there, Madam President, it can be very dangerous for our country. We lament the crime rates in St. Lucia, but we stand in this honorable house, Madam President, and we make careless statements, some of us, disregarding the implications or what the consequences might be. And this is what you get. What you get is that the resources of the entire state now have to be used, have to be utilized to defend an issue or a position that we ought not to have found ourselves in. So I am very, very encouraged that at least a member on the other side is thinking and he's seeing how dangerous these careless and reckless statements can be. Madam President, some of these statements, if it was the ordinary man that was making these statements, I am sure that somebody could even take a jail for making these statements, because they can even be regarded as criminal, Madam President, some of these statements. So when we are looking at legislation...
Leader of Government Business, for you to continue, you need to tie what you're saying more closely to this particular bill. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam President, but I was trying to respond to the Senator's statement about parliamentarians, about the statements we make, the things we say, and then we find ourselves on this list, which we are trying to remove ourselves from by implementing this piece of legislation, Madam President. This is in compliance with the requirements of the OECD and the COCG EU, Madam President, where we were blacklisted and then downgraded to the gray list. So I believe that we get the gist of what this legislation is about, especially since my fellow senator on the opposite side even went on further to use examples to explain it to us and the importance of what we say, Madam President, when it relates to our country and, you know, our position, especially in the OECS, Madam President. We hold a very prominent position in the OECS, and we are trying to maintain that position, and this is why I know that the workers at the Ministry of Finance has been working assiduously to try and get us off this blacklist and now the gray list. So I am submitting this, Madam President, Senator Oje's concerns to the committee stage, and of course, I am in full support of this bill, and I am submitting this for the approval of my other senators for the Honorable House, with the hope that we are going to be able to go through committee stage and explain some of Senator Oje's concerns. Thank you.
Senators, the question is that the economic substance bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to require a relevant entity to satisfy economic substance requirements in order to qualify for a tax exemption on income that has accrued from a source outside of St. Lucia and for related matters.
Again, we'll take it clause by clause. Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 3.
Non-application.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Part 1, clauses 4 to 10.
Administration.
Part 1, clauses 4 to 10 stand part of the bill. Part 2, clauses 11 to 18.
Economic substance requirements.
Part 2, clauses 11 to 18 stand part of the bill.
Yes, Madam President. Need I rise to address you, Madam President? I
Keep
can remain
sitting.
seated. Okay, so Madam President, this is the beginning of the anomaly that we identified earlier in session, where the authority of the minister is the same as the competent authority. And as that reoccurs in several sections, Madam President, I wouldn't wish to be objecting at each one. I think we need to propose some amendment perhaps at this point, because it gets worse, Madam President.
To which section do you refer?
Okay, so Madam President, the first reference, one moment please. Under interpretation, 2C. Right. So under 2C, Madam President, competent authority means the minister as specified under section 4 or his delegate under section 6. So the minister is identified as a competent authority.
Just hold 1 second,
Yes.
Senator.
And in section, and in section 4, it's the minister. Do we record? That point has been made, yes. Okay, so stand by it, yes. You can speak as well, right? I would imagine so. We ain't coming.
So, Senator Ogier, my concern is that we've already gone through and had a vote on 2, 3, and we are now at part 3, 19 to 25. So I'm suggesting that if you wish to make amendments going forward from part 3, clauses 19 to 25, and you need to refer to a prior section to make the case in parts 3, 19 to 25 and onward, that's acceptable. But to start with clause 2, which we've
Agreed.
already taken a decision on, is where your difficulty lies. And I did wait.
Yes, Madam President, I am but a novice in such things, and I appreciate your guidance and advice. Can we have a minute, please? Thank you, Madam
Absolutely.
President. So what's coming through?
Section 319 to 25 as the only place you can find.
Okay, so then we would pick it up there?
Yes.
Take it up there. So that's right.
It appears to recommend that in a year of income, you should examine the other income in the financial statements and subsequent reference to them.
So we're on part 3, clauses 19 to 25.
Miscellaneous.
Be the time.
Now.
Yes, Madam President. Madam President, we are now at part 3, miscellaneous. In that section, we have 23, 24, and 25, where the minister is required to consult with a competent authority. That competent authority has been identified in previous sections of the Act as himself. And I would like to suggest that this is not tenable. It's also quite unhealthy because it means that the minister really is the singular authority for this and several other provisions, including revisions and amendments to the said Act, without recourse to Parliament or any other authority, Madam President. So my specific objection here is, or comment here, relates to Part 3, 23, 24, 25, which are perhaps the most glaring examples of the inconsistency, but we have the same problem in earlier sections, which unfortunately we have addressed.
Madam
Senator
President.
Francis.
Yeah, I see within section 23 that the minister may, after consultation with the relevant authority, and I think the word competent, it should really be the relevant authority. So like when you go back, you'll see, well, the Comptroller of Customs and Inland Revenue and so on, these are the relevant authorities. So I think the word competent should be withdrawn and put with the relevant authority.
Madam President, may I speak? So we appreciate the attempt at an amendment, Madam President, but I don't think that gets us out of the essential dilemma that the minister is named in both. The minister is the competent authority, and he is required in several parts of the Act to consult with himself, in effect. I don't think that's the intention of the Act. So even if we change relevant and suggest that that might be other third-party institutions of the government, I don't think that will work throughout the Act.
I'm going to do it because it's the relevant authority like customs, like the what they call GSL and Flow. What is the company? The service providers and so on, the utility companies and so on. He has to, the relevant authority, he has to go and speak to them before he can make a decision. So the word relevant is the word that is needed there. The minister does not make a decision on his own. He would have to go and get information from the relevant authority. So just a competent.
No, that will not address the matter.
It's important, if we're going to make amendments, to create them before.
Yeah.
When you try to do them at this stage, it's more difficult. If you note generally in parliaments, if you observe, they create the kinds of amendments they would like before the sitting of the House. And that's important because if you look at Standing Order 54B, an amendment must not be inconsistent with any clause already agreed to. And we've already agreed to several, and you cannot now, you can, but it would take us a long time to go back and forth for you to be sure. So you're generally encouraged to come with it.
Madam President, we understand the procedural difficulties, but I presume that it is the intention of the government to pass legislation which can be practical, which can be implemented, which is consistent. And in the case of this, which is an international, which has international dimensions, I would imagine we would want to pass the best possible legislation which can stand the light of day. I would like to suggest that in this particular matter, we have a circular reference, which is what we would call it in an Excel sheet program. We have a circular reference which takes us round in circles and does not resolve the problem. So I understand the procedural difficulty of addressing it, and I apologize if I have raised it at a later stage rather than an earlier stage. But I don't see how the legislation can stand with that particular clause in it, which is a circular reference to the same, where the competent authority is the minister, and the minister is the competent authority. To me, that makes us the laughing stock of the international community.
What I suspect is they have interchanged the words relevant and competent. And since we have gone through the first stages of the bill, approving the first sections, I would want us to continue, Madam President, and we would come with an amendment when and if there is need for an amendment. Unless, Madam President, we can take a 10-minute break, we can suspend this sitting for 10 minutes and come back.
May I agree with Leader of Government Business for a brief recess, Madam President?
This is absurd. I remember I just talked about the golden rule, right? The golden rule does not anticipate
Minister.
absurdity. That's an absurdity.
Minister.
The minister may consult with the competent authority.
Minister.
What?
I do not know that the standing orders allow for a break during committee.
You can.
During committee?
Yeah, you can at any time.
Well, if we can at any time, she'll do it. So when we take the break, we'll discuss it.
Yes, that's okay. That's an absurdity. The minister with consultation with the minister. Come on. That's an absurdity. So we corrected this big like it is relevant. I think all of it.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg for a 20-minute recess and we will come back.
Senators, the question is that the sitting be suspended for 10 minutes. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Well, we are here live for the Senate sitting. The Senate has now taken recess in recess for 10 minutes, I believe it was said, where the economic substance bill will be discussed. So we ask you to join us again in next 10 minutes, where the Senate sitting will reconvene.